Hi guys, I am back with another new lesson for you. So today we're going to be learning about dividing a data set into quartiles, determining interquartile range, and creating box plots, which is a heck of a lot of things to do in one lesson, but I think that we've got this, okay? Remember, if I am going too fast, if you have any questions or anything like that, one, you can always rewatch the video, which is an awesome tool, right? Two, you can always message me if you have any questions. And three, another suggestion that I have is to make sure that you're taking notes throughout the lesson, and that when I tell you to pause and practice a problem, you actually pause and practice a problem. I think that'll really help you strengthen your understanding of what we are doing. Okay, so before I even get into this, I want to think about this term quartiles, which is what we're really introducing today. So when I hear quartiles, my first thought is quarters, right? And when I'm dividing something into quarters, I know what number is represented or what number relates to quarters, and that's 4. There's 4 quarters in a dollar, right? Whenever we see that root quad, it means 4. That's why your quad muscle has 4 muscles in it. Quads have 4 wheels, etc. So what we're doing when we're dividing something into quartiles is we're dividing it into 4 even groups. So if I have a box, and I want to, or a rectangle, I guess would be what I would call that, and I wanted to divide it into 4 equal groups, how many lines would I put into that box in order to divide it into 4 groups? If I wanted to divide it into 4 groups, personally, if I want to make it a kind of even, I'm going to divide it in half, and I'm going to divide 2 more lines. So I should have 3 lines going through a box in order to get it into 4 sections. That is exactly what we're going to be doing today, but instead of doing a box, we're going to be doing it through a data set. All right, so in order to divide a data set, which is essentially just a series of numbers, into quartiles, my first step that I'm going to have to make sure that I do is line them up from least to greatest. The reason that we do this is because our first line that we're going to be drawing is a line that we have already learned how to find, and that is our median. So when we're talking about quartiles, our median is actually our second quartile. That's this line, quartile 1. Oh, that does not look like a Q. Quartile 2, quartile 3. That's actually just that second line that goes right in the middle of a data set. Remember, our median is our middle number. Our first step here is to line them up from least to greatest and then just find the median. So if I'm lining up these numbers from least to greatest, I'm going to start with my 2, and then I'm going to go 4, 4, 5, 7, 8, 8. I always like to make sure that I have the same amount of numbers so that I know I didn't skip anything. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so now I have my numbers in order from least to greatest. I'm going to just erase these because I don't really need them anymore. And my first step after that, so I guess like my second, third step, whatever, is to find my median. So when I've taught you guys how to find the median, I've kind of gone back and forth on this, or whether you cross it off or you underline it. I think that underlining is the best idea. You're going to have to underline right now because you're going to use those other numbers again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to underline 1 from the bottom, 1 from the top, 1 from the bottom, 1 from the top, 1 from the bottom, 1 from the top, until I find my median. My median is my second quartile. So quartile 2 is the same thing as median, and my number is 5. So we know that my second quartile here is 5. Now, I still have to find these other lines here, right? My quartile 1 and my quartile 3. In order to do this, all I do is I find the median of each side, and that's going to give me my answers. So to find the median, I'm only looking at these numbers. I do the same thing, right? I cross off 1 from the bottom, 1 from the top, and I'm left with quartile 1. And now on this side, I cross off 1 from the bottom, 1 from the top, and I am left with quartile 3. So really, as long as you know how to find the median, you know how to find quartiles. Finding the quartiles is really just finding your median 3 separate times. Now, we've already gone over this as well. Our range is really just my biggest number minus my smallest number. The other thing that I said we were going to be learning today is interquartile range. What that means is we're just finding the range of the quartiles. So we're taking my biggest quartile, which is always going to be quartile 3. Interquartile range is quartile 3 minus my smallest quartile, which is always going to be quartile 1, because remember, we line them up from least to greatest. So quartile 3 minus quartile 1, and that is how you find your interquartile range. So if I'm looking at my data set that I already found my quartiles, quartile 3 was 8, quartile 1 was 4, 8 minus 4 is 4, so my interquartile range here is 4. Now, my last thing that I said we were going to go over today is creating a box plot or a box and whisker plot. It's probably better to call it a box and whisker plot because that will remind you to do all of the steps. And in order to create a box and whisker plot, what you start with is simply a number line. So I'm going to make a number line that includes my data set. I only go from 2 to 8 here, so I can easily count by 1. Obviously, if you have to go from like 2 to 100, you're not going to count by 1. But on this one, it's pretty easy because I'm just going to go 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And what we are going to do is we are going to turn our quartiles into a box because it's called a box plot. And so I am going to make a line above 4 for quartile 1. A line above 5, which is quartile 2 or my median, and then another line above 8, which is quartile 3. And I'm going to turn these into a box. So what it's going to end up looking like is the left side of the box is going to be your quartile 1. This line in the middle of your box is quartile 2. And the line at the end, or making up the right side of your box, is quartile 3. But I called it a box and whisker plot because we still have to make our whiskers. All our whiskers are little lines, which look like cat whiskers, connecting to the smallest and the biggest number in my data set. The smallest number in my data set, I put them in order from least to greatest, so that makes this very easy to find, is 2. What that means is that I have to make a little whisker that connects my box to number 2. And now I have to make another whisker that connects to my largest number. In this example, my largest number is actually the same number as my third quartile, which means that all I have to do is make this a little bit thicker, really, to let them know that my right whisker or my largest number is the same number as my third quartile. So when you see a box and whisker plot, the number to the far left is your smallest number. I'm just going to write small. The number to your far right, or your whisker to your far right, would connect to your biggest number. And then your left side of your box is quartile 1. The line in the middle of your box is quartile 2. And the right side of your box is quartile 3. I am going to just write this as a model. So just kind of what a box and whisker plot might look like. With labels, I want you to write this down because I think that it's going to be very helpful to refer back to if you have something that just kind of shows you just as a reference. So I'll be back. Make sure that you have a pen and paper. Okay, so when you have a box and whisker plot where the third quartile is not the same as the largest number, it's going to look something like this, where you're going to have a box and then a whisker to your left and a whisker to your right. What is important to know here, which is that what I want you to write down, is that this whisker is always going to lead to your smallest number. So make sure you write that on your diagram. That might be kind of hard to read. Let me bring this a little bit closer here. That says smallest number. You might just have to write that down. This is your first quartile. This line in the middle of your box is your second quartile, which is also known as your median. This ending line is quartile 3. And this line right here, or this whisker, is your biggest number. So make sure that you have this written down so that you can reference it, so that a lot of times, honestly, on like testing and things like that, they'll just give you a box plot and they'll say, what's quartile 2? Or what's the biggest number? Or what's the smallest number? And you're just expected to be able to interpret the box plots, because it's a lot of times it's difficult to be able to make a box plot on like a computer. So what I have seen is they're asking you to interpret it. So make sure that you know how to interpret a box and whisker plot. Write this down and you can use this as your reference sheet. One more thing I want you to know is that sometimes your third quartile is going to be is going to be called your upper quartile, and sometimes your quartile 1 is going to be called your lower quartile. Just in case you see that vocabulary on anything, what they mean, quartile 1 is your lower quartile, which is your smallest number, your lowest number, or your lowest quartile, I'm sorry. And quartile 3 is your upper quartile, which would be your largest quartile. All right, I want to do another example of finding quartiles, interquartile range, and creating a box and whisker plot. So we know that our first step when we are finding our quartiles is going to be to put our numbers in order from least to greatest. So I'm going to look here. My smallest number is 2. I have 2 2s. I have a 3. I have 2 4s. Chomper, you are snoring so loud. I have a 5, and then I have 2 8s and a 9. My next step is going to be to find my median, which is also known as my second quartile. So in order to do that, I'm going to cross off 1 from the bottom, 1 from the top, 1 from the bottom, 1 from the top, 1 from the bottom, 1 from the top, 1 from the bottom, 1 to the top, until I'm left with either 1 or 2 numbers. Remember, if I'm crossing off 4 from the left side, I have to be crossing off the same amount of numbers from my right side. If I'm left with 2 numbers, I'm going to have to find the average of those numbers, aka adding them up and dividing. If I'm left with 1 number, then I am good. So I'm left with 1 number in this problem, which means that my second quartile is 4. All right, I still have to find my first and my third quartiles. And in order to find my first and my third quartiles, all I have to do is find the median of each side. So what I'm going to do in order to find my first quartile is find the median of my left-hand side. And I'm going to cross off 1 from the bottom, 1 from the top. And on this example, I'm left with 2 numbers. So I'm left with 2 and 3. In this problem, 2 and 3 are very close to each other, so you might be able to look at that and know what number is right in between 2 and 3. If not, all you do is you just add them up and divide by 2, since there are 2 numbers, to find the average of them. If I added 2 plus 3, I'd get 5, and then dividing that by 2 would be 2.5. You could just look at 2 and 3, and you might know that quartile 1 is 2.5, or 2.5. I'm going to actually just write this out. And now I have to do the same thing to the right-hand side. So I have to cross off 1 from the bottom, 1 from the top. And now I'm left with 2 numbers, but they're the same number. If I'm adding up 8 plus 8, which is 16, dividing by 2 is 8. If my numbers are the same, that number is just going to be my quartile. So quartile 3 is 8. So now I have to find my inner quartile range. Remember, my inner quartile range is just the range of my quartiles. The biggest quartile minus the smallest quartile. My biggest quartile is always quartile 3. Equals quartile 3 minus quartile 1, which is 8, minus 2.5. I want you to pause that and solve that if you need to. I have a video on adding and subtracting decimals if you need to go watch that real fast. That's how you would set it up if you needed to. Pause it, come back when you have it. Alrighty, in order to solve this, you would borrow 10 minus 5 is 5, bring down my decimal, and 7 minus 2 is 5. So my inner quartile range would be 5.5, or 5 5/10, or 5.5. And I still need to find create my box plot. I'm going to use the space down here, so I'm actually going to erase all of this. Just remember that my inner quartile range is 5.5, or 5.5. And now I am going to create my box plot. Remember, when I'm creating my box plot, I'm starting off with just simply a number line. I'm creating a number line from my smallest number to my biggest number. I'm only going from 2 to 9 in this problem, so I can count by ones. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. My quartiles are going to be what creates my box. So quartile 1 is 2.5. 2.5 is between 2 and 3. We just found that, right? So I'm going to create my first line above 2 and 3. Quartile 2, or my median, is 4. And quartile 3 is 8. I am turning these into a probably very wonky looking box. And now I have to create my whiskers because it's a box and whisker plot. Remember, my left whisker connects to my smallest number. I already put these numbers in order from least. Sorry, my computer just kind of froze there, but my left whisker connects to my smallest number, which is 2. So my left whisker is going to go to 2, and then my right whisker connects to my largest number in our data set, which is 9. So this whisker is just going to go to 9. And now I have my quartiles, quartile 1, quartile 2, quartile 3. I have my box plot, and I already found my interquartile range. I'm going to do one last problem just so you guys can see what you would do if your median doesn't happen to fall in one number. So AKA if I'm like crossing off from each side, if I end up with 2 numbers instead of 1 number, because that does kind of change how we would solve this a tiny little bit. Okay, so still the same first step. I'm going to write my numbers in order from least to greatest. So I have 2, I have 4, 5, 7, 8, 9. I have 6 numbers on the top and I have 6 numbers on the bottom, so I know I didn't leave anything out. Now I have to find my median, and in order to find my median, I have to cross 1 number from the bottom, 1 number from the top, or 1 smallest number, 1 biggest number, another number from the bottom, another number from the top. And now I'm left with 2 numbers. I'm left with a 5 and a 7. And like I have told you guys in my previous video, in order to find my median here, I'd have to add those numbers up and divide by 2, because I'm finding the average of the 2 numbers. Or I could even look at the numbers and see if I know what goes exactly in the middle of them. 5 and 7 might be an easier example. What's right in the middle of 5 and 7 would be 6. But if you didn't know that, you could just do 5 plus 7 equals 12. Divided by 2 is 6. Either way, my quartile 2 or my median is going to be 6. Now, this is where it's slightly different. I'm not circling either of these numbers. So both of these numbers are still going to be in the game. They're still going to be able to be used for quartiles 1 and 3. All I'm doing is I'm going to divide a line right in between. Quartile 2 is 6. Meaning that now I have quartile 1 and quartile 3, the numbers that I'm going to use in order to solve them. But 5 and 7 are not crossed out. I can still use them. They are still in the game. The only time when I am not going to use the number anymore is if I circled it and it was my only possible number. It was the only number left. There are 2 numbers left. I didn't use a 5 and I didn't use a 7, which means that we are still able to use them for quartiles 1 and quartile 3. So now, in order to find quartile 1, 1 from the bottom, 1 from the top, I'm left with 1 number here, so quartile 1 is 4. Quartile 3, 1 from the bottom, 1 from the top. I'm left with 1 number left, which is 8. So my quartile 1 is 4, quartile 2 is 6, and quartile 3 is 8. In order to find my interquartile range, remember I'm taking my largest quartile minus my smallest quartile, which is quartile 3 minus quartile 1. Quartile 3 is 8. Quartile 1 is 4. So my interquartile range, I'm going to actually write this in a different color, would be 8 minus 4 equals 4. I'll just keep this over here in case you want to reference it. And I still have to create my box and my whisker plot, which, same as always. The only thing that really changed was that I drew that line in the middle. That's literally the only thing that changed. Still making a number line, going from 2 to 9. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. If you want to add more numbers to the sides, that's totally fine. You're going to see more numbers on the side, most likely like on tests and things like that, so they might include like a 1 and a 10. Those really don't matter. Those don't change anything. They would just be there. My quartile 1 is 4, so I would draw my little line above 4. Quartile 2 is 6. Draw a line above 6. Quartile 3 is 8. Draw my line above 8. Turn those into a very wobbly box. And now I still have to connect to my biggest and my smallest numbers in the data set. Not my biggest and smallest numbers on my number line, just my biggest and smallest numbers in the data set that we got. My smallest number in this data set is 2, so I'm connecting to 2. My largest number in this data set is 9, so I'm connecting to 9. And there is my box and my whisker plot. All right, it's going to be a little bit harder in order to write sample questions down in the description box. So I'm going to link you to a page which has some sample problems that you guys can use, but I won't have like sample problems and answers in the description box. But as always, if you guys have any questions at all, reach out to me, email me, message me, comment, whatever, and I am happy to help. Tomorrow, the next video, I'm going to be going over MAD, which is our mean average deviation, another new concept that we have not gone over yet. but I am confident that we can do it. So I'll see you guys soon. Bye.